won't lie, I'm a little nervous about this one. I feel like I didn't really put any thought into this reading challenge after I set my goal last year. But I guess here we go. We're gonna talk about it. Hi, my name is Sarah Freshly and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So every year I participate in Karina from Time for Reading's reading challenge. It's called the Big Book Reading Challenge. And basically she sets like 4 prompts and 1 bonus prompt, and it just encourages you to read big books. Now, I did do a good job of reading big books. Well, I feel like I did a good job of reading big books in 2024. I haven't really like looked yet because I didn't want to feel that shame, if I'm being completely honest. But we're gonna do it. We're gonna look at it and it's gonna be fine. So I'm in my Storygraph app now and I'm gonna go ahead and take a look at the books that I read last year. So we'll go back to 2024 and then I'm gonna filter it down to include only books that are over 500 pages and filter. Okay, 13 books. I read 13 big books last year. I feel like that's not terrible. Looking through the list, it's like all from series. Oh, War and Peace. That's the only one I read that wasn't from a series. Okay, so, well, that's translation done. I feel bad kind of counting this because technically that was supposed to be a part of my big book reading in 2023. And I started it, I think, in February of 2023. And then I finished it in like January of 2024. So technically I did finish War and Peace in 2024. But I think I was intending on like counting that towards my 2023. This is the edition that's translated by Anthony Briggs. So I feel like I've talked about this quite a bit at this point because this was also on my best books of the year list. Not to mention I took like 11 months to read it. So I ended up talking about it quite a bit in a lot of wrap-ups and everything. But it's a fantastic book. I've read Anna Karenina as well by Leo Tolstoy, but I just didn't connect with it like I connected with this one. And in fact, I kind of want to go back and read it again now that I've read this one and really liked it. But that's probably far off in the future. But this is just such a good juxtaposition of actual like war and peace, where you kind of start off in this time of like luxury and like fancy parties, and you get to see these like fun characters, the way they interact with each other. And it's funny. Like nobody told me War and Peace was funny, but it's funny. By the end of volume 1, I already had so many like favorite characters and people that I got like really excited when they entered into whatever scene I was reading. And then as you like read through the story, obviously like the war is starting. And so a lot of the men that are a part of the story are leaving to participate in that, either on the front lines or working higher up or working with strategy. So you get a lot of those scenes, and I will say those ones are definitely like the hardest to read through. I'm sure for some people it might be their favorites, but based off of everything, like all the reviews and things that I've read about this, I would say that that is overall what people find like the most challenging to read through. So then the book entirely changes to feeling like you have luxury on one side and this peaceful time and these parties and everything over here. And then over here, you have the war that's going on. So really the only bits that you can feel of like the fact that a war is currently happening is that when you're at home with anybody that's not, you know, actively participating in the war, you just get these political conversations sometimes, and then obviously the fact that a lot of the men are missing. But that's really it. So it feels so separate. And like 2 entirely different worlds are happening at the same time. And then the book continues and things are getting worse and worse. And so then the war starts like bleeding more into this like peaceful time, into the home life where they can't get as many of the groceries and things that they would typically be able to get, where more and more people are being sent off to fight. And soon they can no longer live in the same place they're currently living, or they've got like refugees that are coming in and people that need places to stay. So you're seeing more and more of the effects of this war that's happening seep into the home life. And so I think that that's really the coolest part about this book, that you're getting those 2 pieces and then they just like bleed in together as the story progresses. There's also so much more. Tolstoy loves to go on and on about history, who gets to write history, how it gets written. There are lots of like meandering monologues that he just has where he's just talking about it. But I appreciated that as well. Like that is also one of the things that one of the themes I find the most most fascinating to read about. And I've read a lot of books that kind of go over that theme. I ended up giving this a 4.5. I couldn't go like all the way to the 5 stars just because I did really struggle with it in certain areas. And that's probably a me problem. This is a classic for a reason. It very well should be. I would recommend this to most people that I came across. It's so good. It's so good. Okay, now let's think of the TBR vet, because I feel like that one I don't have. I initially intended on reading The Little Friend by Donna Tartt for that one. So this one, I only made it 130 pages in, and it's like a 700-page book. So oops. I do plan on picking it back up very soon. I have like active plans to pick it back up, but yeah, I didn't get through it. But this was originally what I was thinking of. I remember that for sure because obviously I started it. And I'm trying to think if there was a book. Yes, Bloody Rose I read by Nicholas Eames. This is one of the oldest books, or was one of the oldest books on my TBR, and I ended up reading it in December. This is the second book in the Band series by Nicholas Eames. So the first one's called Kings of the Wild. It's one of my favorite books ever. I absolutely love it. I've read it 3 times, and I hadn't read the second book because, I don't know, I was nervous, and also he hasn't continued the series. He's taking a long time to write the 3rd book. I don't blame him for that. I don't think authors like owe us anything, but I do really want the 3rd book, and the idea of being fully caught up in the series was kind of sad. Now, Kings of the Wild follows a band of mercenaries. They used to be huge in this land, I guess. Like, they were very well known. People knew who they are. They were a big deal. And the wild is like this huge forest where there's tons of like these monsters and creatures, and it's crazy dangerous. Like in the forest, above the forest, like creatures in the sky, all of it super dangerous. So most of the towns and everything are on one side, and then there's one city that's on the opposite side of the wild. And so these mercenaries are like long since retired, but one of them, Gabe, he goes to his friend Clay, who is like the main character, and he tells him that his daughter is stuck in the town that's on the other side of the wild. And so he wants to go save her. So he wants to bring the band back together for one last adventure to go across the wild and save his daughter. And so like that's what the story is. It's hilarious. It brings things together so well, like the callbacks to things from earlier, the like very subtle foreshadowing that becomes a thing later. It does a really great job. The characters, oh my gosh. So many of my favorite characters are in that book. One of my favorite characters of all time, Moog. I love him so much. And then Bloody Rose doesn't really follow that mercenary band. It follows another one, and instead we're getting the look from this bard. She's younger. I can't remember how old she is. Older teenager, maybe just into adulthood. Her mom was a bard, and now our protagonist Tam wants to, like, she also likes playing music, but her dad doesn't really like hearing it because her mom's passed away, and it like brings up a lot of old memories for him. But she has been like practicing and learning outside of that with, I think, her uncle, who's been teaching her, and then all of a sudden she gets a chance to join in with this band that she's idolized for basically her whole life. So then you're getting to see kind of the band perspective again, like this band of mercenaries perspective again, but from somebody who hasn't been in one before. So everything seems new to her. Also, the world itself is kind of changing as these books are happening. Like it really in this one, and then it kind of like has started in the first one. Mercenaries are no longer going into the wild and like doing these great big adventures. There's just so many bands of mercenaries because that's like the way to like fame and popularity and money, that whenever a new monster is attacking a village or something, there's just so many of them to take care of it that it's not really such a huge deal anymore. And they've even like kind of beaten back some of like where the wild is so that the monsters are not as far out or as close to the villages. And so they just kind of change it to being like they're fighting in arenas where people can watch them fight monsters. So like people will go out, they'll collect these creatures out in the wild, they'll bring them into the arena, and like that's where the bands will fight them. So you're also seeing this like transition in how things are done, but it also kind of feels like a cheapening of what being in a band, like of what being a mercenary is, because it doesn't really have that grand sense of adventure anymore. The risk doesn't really feel as real anymore, and it feels like it's all purely for entertainment, which also starts to bring into the question of like this doesn't seem ethical anymore. Like, you're capturing these animals that aren't bothering anybody and bringing them into these arenas just so that these bands could fight them. Like, that seems silly. There were already ethical quandaries being brought up in the first one, and now it's even more so in this one. It was good. I didn't love it. Definitely not as much as I loved Kings of the Wild, which was a little bit disappointing. I think the parts that I liked the best were when we did get to see characters that we saw from the first book, which is a little sad. Like, I don't want that to be, I wanted to love the new characters for who they were, but it just didn't feel the same. I don't know how to explain it. Also, this one I gave 3.5 stars to. Okay, a new book, or new to you. So this one I definitely did because I read the second book in the Fourth Wing series, so that's Iron Flame. The Fourth Wing series, if you don't know, is about this girl, Violet, and she is going to this like school that is for fighting, and there's these like dragons that are in it. They kind of like fight alongside dragons, and it's this very like tough environment to be in. She could have gone to a number of different ways. It's kind of like, think Divergent, where she's kind of like picking which area she wants to go to. So Violet has kind of been training her whole life to be in the more brainy sect of school. Like, she basically grew up just like studying and being a scribe. And so that was kind of the plan, and then she ends up deciding instead to go into this like much harsher school. So that's like what the first book is. It's her like making that decision, going into the school and everything, what happens from there. And then the second book, there's a lot more like wider world ramifications, like what's going on further outside of the school, and a lot is going on. But I can't really talk too much about it without spoiling things that happen. It is a romantasy, so there is a romance that's also at the center of this fantasy book. The guy's like one of those very like dark, mysterious bad boys, but overall it's really fun. I had a lot of fun reading Fourth Wing. Reading Iron Flame, it was still good. I didn't like it as much as I liked Fourth Wing, but I still liked it a good deal, and I'm still very excited to read Onyx Storm. Okay, what else do we have? Oh, a book that's a stretch. I don't know that I really had one. I could maybe say Royal Assassin for that. Like, this book, I would say, stretched me. It's hard to say that now because since then I've read a lot of books in the same world that are like just as long as this one. So basically I started reading Robin Hobb this year, starting with the Farseer trilogy, and now I'm in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and this is the second book that's in the Farseer trilogy, Royal Assassin. So the reason I'm not picking the first book from the series is because it's much shorter, so it wouldn't classify as being a big book, whereas this one I think is like 800-ish pages. Oh, just kidding, only 700. But I do think that in general reading these books was a stretch for me because I hadn't really read a lot of high fantasy, at least not in a while. I think the only other high fantasy that I've read, besides Lord of the Rings, of course, was Game of Thrones. I read the first 2 books, I want to say, and maybe like half of the third before I was kind of just like over it. But that's probably an unpopular opinion. I really liked the first one, and the second one I still liked quite a bit, but by the third I was kind of like, I'm good. Especially without knowing for sure that it was going to be like wrapped up. But anyways, so this was really a stretch for me in that like I was entering into this universe of books, the Realm of the Elderlings, which has like 4 trilogies, and 1 quartet of books in it, plus like 2 novellas or something. So there's a lot of books that are contained in this, which felt very daunting, but I've been having so much fun reading them, and so I would consider this a stretch. The Farseer trilogy follows Fitz, who is a young boy at the start of the first book, and he is the son of a prince, but he is like the bastard son. So he ends up being like taken away from his mom, taken away from where he's grown up, I think at like 6 years old or something. And then he's brought to the kingdom to be raised there, but he's not exactly being raised like a prince's son. Like, they are teaching him some things, but also he's very much seen as this like outsider. So he kind of like exists in this limbo space for a lot of, especially the first book. I would say this book is really where he more starts to like come into his own. And this one I loved. This was a 5-star read for me. Wait, was this one a 5-star? I know the next one was a 5-star, Assassin's Quest. I read them like back to back because I was so obsessed after reading this one. Okay, this was a 4.5, my bad. And then the third book in the trilogy was a 5-star read. But yeah, this was so good. And like the other characters that were being brought in like really got more background and felt more tangible to me than they did in the first book. I just felt like there wasn't enough time to really flesh them out, and we were so focused on Fitz in the first book that like this one really took off for me and solidified my love for Robin Hobb. Or maybe sparked my love of Robin Hobb, and then the third book solidified it. And now I'm reading the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which is the next trilogy in this universe, and I've just been loving it again, even though it's like focused on different characters and everything. So yeah, Robin Hobb, amazing. Okay, so I think that one works for Stretch pretty well. So the only other one is a book by a BIPOC or non-white author, which I don't think that I did this year. Because let's be real, most of my books were by Robin Hobb that I read, most of the big books I read. And then the other like majority of my big books that I read were from the Expanse series, which I read 5 books from that series this year. Wow, that's a lot. That's more than I even realized. So I failed on this one. I was intending, I'm pretty sure what the book that I said that I wanted to read in my original video was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which I ended up reading half of in 2024. I finished it now. I finished it, I don't know, like a week ago or something, but technically it was finished in 2025. So I guess challenge failed. I only read 4 out of the 5 books, but that's okay. This year we're gonna do better. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this year. First of all, I've already read 2 big books that would count for this challenge. So the first one is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. As I said, I read like half of this in 2024 and the other half in 2025. This was purely because I couldn't handle it. I was really struggling while reading this one, which I think is a common thing. I don't know how people do like reading vlogs of this one. The idea of like needing to finish it for a video, like in order to be able to finish a video and it being like the main book you're focusing on for the entire length of it, I don't know if I could have done it. Like I very much needed the break that I took from this book. So A Little Life follows 4 boys, 4 classmates. So they're all going to university and they live in New York. You have Jude, JB, Willem, and Malcolm. I would say Jude and Willem are really like our main characters of like the 4. You get to hear the most about them, but you can get really anybody's perspective. Actually, I think even outside of the 4 people, like sometimes you are following people that are just really big in their lives. You see a lot of their lives. So from college and then like up to late in their lives. But I think that the really unique part about this book, so Jude is kind of like a special character within this group. He's a lot more closed off about himself, about his past and like stories about him than any of the others are. So they'll share things about themselves all the time, just like any like friend group would. But Jude will participate in these conversations, but he won't like offer up anything about himself. And even reading the book, you get these like tiny little glimpses at the beginning of Jude's past or of things that have maybe impacted who he is today, but he feels like a total mystery. Like you definitely learn more about the other characters first, even though arguably you're hearing the most about Jude. Like you're following him and like the things that he's doing day to day a lot compared to the others. But then as the book continues, you get more and more about his past and what he's been through. And it is so much. And you keep thinking, that's gotta be it. Like, I'm sure that that is everything that you could possibly need to know, like all the big stuff that you could possibly need to know about Jude. And then there's just more and more and more. And like, that's the part that was really hard for me to read. So that was why I had to put it down like halfway through. And then when I picked it back up, then I just like, I read the full second half. So I kind of treated this as if it was like a duology, I guess you could say. I bawled my eyes out. I think that that's a very common thing. Everybody talks about how much you cry during this book. I think there were 2 parts that I like really lost it. And like the end, I could cry now just like thinking about it. Oh my gosh, I like finished this like a bit ago too. It's not even like I just finished it, but it still feels raw. That's what this book feels. It feels raw and it's tough, but it's also so good. I think at certain points it felt a little bit over the top in like how much it was like really pulling on these emotions. I think what this book does incredibly well is you feel like you're a member of the friend group. Not in that you know the friends like so well. It's just that you experience such a big part of the group in Jude as the friends do. You get the same experience that they do. You fall in love with him the same way that they do without really knowing anything about him. And then you learn the things about him, and it's just like this roller coaster of emotions, and it's very conflicting, but you feel like you're his friend too. It's just done so well. So I totally understand why people like this book so much. So this is going to fill the BIPOC, the non-white big book prompt. And then I do think that they're maybe slightly different this year than they have been in previous years. So I'm gonna go check out the challenge real quick. And actually I should say that Karina from Time for Reading, she actually made 2 different versions of the challenge this year. So one is the like classic or original version. And then the other one is called the Choose Your Own Adventure, which I think is just to read 5 big books, or like you could create your own themes for them. So I'm just taking part in the classic or original version of this. I do have a goal to read 10 big books in 2025, which I think I'll have no problem hitting since I did 13 this year. And I've already read 2 and we're still in January. So I think I'll be fine. Okay, the challenge is only slightly different. Only one prompt has changed. So we still have a book that's been translated. I think I only have 2 that are on my shelf. So I have Don Quixote, and I also have The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Both are translated. I would love to read this book this year and like make this the pick that I like predict that I'll be reading. But I think that I'm actually gonna go with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo purely because it is on my TBR spin challenge for 2025. Like, it's on my stack. So it will hopefully come up in one of those prompts and I'll read it through that. But even if it doesn't, it is also on my 25 books to read in 2025 list. So it's a definite goal to read this one. And so I think that it would be smart of me to pick this one. That's not to say I won't read this one this year. I still very well might, because I am very excited about reading this one. But anyways, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson, and this one is translated by Reg Keeland. This is a part of the Millennium series, which at least the first book got made into a movie. I don't know if the others, like the sequels, have. So this is kind of like a detective series, except the detective is actually a journalist, not a detective. And then they're helped out by this woman who is the girl with the dragon tattoo. Her name is Lisbeth. Together they tap into a vein of unfathomable iniquity and astonishing corruption. They're looking into the disappearance of this woman who was a part of like one of the wealthiest families in Sweden. She disappeared over 40 years ago, and then her uncle is now seeking out the help of this journalist who is being helped by Lisbeth. But I think that this definitely makes sense for my book in translation this year. Okay, a big book you've been meaning to read. This one I've definitely done already, and I'm so happy. That is The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. So this was actually the first book that I read as a part of TBR Spin for this year. I know I've mentioned it twice already in this video. It's a reading challenge that I do where at the beginning of the year you pick 12 books, and then each month we spin a wheel, and that leads us to a prompt that leads us to one of the books on that stack. These spins happen during live shows, the TBR Spin and Sprint, where we spin the wheel, pick the book, and then we do some reading sprints to get started on it. Or you can read something else, or you can just like be productive during reading sprints. I do that all the time. But I already think that this new method is working great because I was able to get started on this book during the live stream, and then I just wanted to finish it after that because I already started it. So this follows Emmett and Billy. So these are 2 brothers. Emmett has just gotten out of like a correctional facility because he ended up shoving a kid that was bullying him, might I say. And the kid falls over and he hits his skull on this like piece of carnival equipment or something, and he ends up dying. And so that's why Emmett was put into this facility. Emmett very much struggles with this. Like, he feels like he doesn't deserve anything or like much of a life because this happened and because he is responsible for the death of like this other kid. But a lot of the adults in his life are kind of like trying to convince him that like he does deserve something, like he is a good kid. And I think it is tough to like grapple with even as a reader. But I will say that not that long into the book, you're just kind of seeing Emmett as this like normal sweet kid, even though technically like the first thing you know about him is this like terrible thing that he did. Also, Billy, his younger brother, is so sweet, and their relationship is so cute. But Emmett gets released a little bit early because his father has passed away and he needs to like kind of take care of some things like the house and everything. Their mother has long since left. And so Emmett comes home, he gets Billy from these neighbors or other people in the community that were taking care of him. And he and Billy are planning on leaving the area that they're in and traveling somewhere else to kind of start over, start a new life. Because obviously there's a lot of opinions about Emmett in like this town, in this very small community. So it's supposed to be this like big trip of a novel, but so many things end up happening that kind of divert things or change like what's going on or what the mission is, or I guess really more like when they can start the mission because they have to like do this other thing now first. And it reminds me so much of the Odyssey, which it does reference in the book itself. I won't say how because I feel like that's spoilers, it's further into the book, but it is definitely brought up several times, and it very much feels like that. Like it feels like, okay, this is where we're going, but then like these other things are happening that we need to kind of focus on. It ended up being like a nice little adventure. I had a lot of fun reading it. I do think that the other Amor Towles books that I've read, Rules of Civility and Gentleman in Moscow, are still my favorites of his. So that by default, that makes this one my least favorite of his, but it feels like weird to say that because I still really liked it. But just those other two books are like favorites of all time of mine. So this would have had to be a favorite of all time in order to compete with that. The fourth prompt, so this is the one that's different. So last year it was a new book or a new book to you, and now it's a recommendation. So honestly, I could have also used The Lincoln Highway for that one because I have a friend that's been telling me to read that for a while. She also really loved the other two Amor Towles and I'd read this one and really loved it too, and so she really wanted me to read it. So technically I could put that in either spot, but let me take a look at what books I have that could be considered a recommendation. So I think these V.E. Schwab books could count. They're both over 500 pages. When I was purchasing the first book of the trilogy, the cashier told me that they really liked the series, and that especially like the final book in the series. So I guess technically that's a recommendation. I just talked about in a recent video how I'm hoping to read Infinite Jest this year, and I had some people in the comments that were like recommending it, but also like giving me kind of like tips and everything for reading it, which was so nice. Definitely feel more motivated now to read it. Although this one could also, I've owned this one for a while, so this could, maybe I'll swap The Lincoln Highway and Infinite Jest. And I realized I never even said what this was about in my 25 books in 2025, but it's set in an addict's halfway house and a tennis academy, and it is featuring one of the most endearingly screwed up families in contemporary fiction. It explores the essential questions about what entertainment is and why it has come to dominate our lives, about how our desire for entertainment affects our need to connect with other people, and about what the pleasures we choose say about who we are. Okay, I feel like it's been forever since I read the synopsis to this, but like this feels very prevalent today. So I think maybe that's what I'll do. This can be the book that I've been meaning to read for a while. Amor Towles can be the recommended book. That feels right. I mean, this is all subject to change throughout the year. I feel like I always set the books that I want to read for this, and then they usually end up kind of changing around a little bit, at least throughout the year. Oh, another one that could work for a book that I've been meaning to read is The Little Friend by Donna Tartt, especially considering I started it and I still haven't read it. Okay, and then the bonus prompt, a book that will stretch you. Obviously, Infinite Jest can work with that. It's huge and it's very intimidating. I also think A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, just because I've never read an autobiography that's like quite this length, and that also seems very intimidating. I also think that Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter could work. Yeah, this is nearly 600 pages. And I just don't know how a thriller can be this long. I guess Gone Girl, that one was pretty long, and that one did work for that length, but I don't see it happening. Like I don't see myself being engaged for that long. And so I keep putting off picking this one up. Okay, I think for right now, I've just like had another peruse of my shelves. I think for right now, the book that I'm gonna say makes the most sense for this prompt for me is Long Walk to Freedom, because of what I already said. Like I've never read a biography that's like this length. And I feel like all the memoirs that I've read have been like, the ones that are about well-known people have been more about like famous people in like the pop world or in like the comedy world or things like that. Not somebody that like played such a large role like politically and in history. So I think that this makes sense. Okay, so we got to see all 13 books that I read, all 13 big books that I read in 2024 that I unfortunately fell short of quite completing the challenge for 2024, but that I've already made a good head start on the challenge for 2025. So I definitely feel like I can get it accomplished this year, and I'm excited to see how well I do at this same video in a year's time. Thanks so much for watching. Please let me know what big books you're hoping on getting to this year. If you've read any of these, if any of the ones that I talked about, what your thoughts are on them. And other than that, please do consider subscribing and liking the video if you liked it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.